Mommy said it was because of our skin.
Please, they're hurting my mama. Those 5 words ripped through the air of Hartman Tower's marble lobby like a lightning strike. A little girl, barefoot, bleeding and trembling, stood beneath the golden chandelier that hung over the world of billionaires and power deals. Her tiny hands clutched the strap of a torn school backpack. Her voice cracked, but her courage didn't. Please, somebody help. My mama works at the cafe downstairs. They're beating her. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. Security froze. Executives glanced at each other, unsure whether to act or pretend they hadn't heard. The hush was heavy, cruel. Then the elevator doors opened, and out stepped William Hartman, CEO of Hartman Resorts, the kind of man whose presence made entire rooms stand still. He looked down at the little girl. Her face was streaked with tears and dust. The lobby's polished floors reflected 2 different worlds, a child desperate for help and a man who had never known desperation. Who's hurting your mama? His tone was low, deliberate. The manager, and a man, she sobbed. They said she doesn't belong here. They said she's just a waitress, because she's black. For the first time that morning, the billionaire's expression shifted not to pity, but to purpose. He handed his briefcase to an assistant and said just one word, "Show me." What followed in the next 6 minutes would change everything about him, about his company, and about how this city saw a single act of courage. A mother, beaten and humiliated for nothing but the color of her skin. A child, brave enough to run into the lion's den for help. And a man who thought he was just another CEO, suddenly facing a truth he could no longer ignore. This isn't just a headline. This is a black story, a story of strength, dignity, and what happens when justice walks through the wrong door at exactly the right time. You're watching Hidden Worth, where real stories remind us what humanity still means. Stay with me, because what William Hartman did next left an entire city speechless. Before the scream, before the blood, before the billionaire and the headlines, Aaliyah Brooks was just a woman trying to make it through another shift. She arrived every morning at Hartman Cafe 15 minutes early, never late, uniform crisp, apron tied neatly around her waist. Her name tag always polished, her smile warm and practiced like a habit she couldn't break even when there wasn't much to smile about. To most customers, Aaliyah was the friendly waitress with the soft voice and the eyes that carried a quiet kind of sadness. What they didn't see was the weight she carried. A single mother, working doubles, renting a 1-bedroom apartment in South Atlanta, trying to keep the lights on and her daughter in school. Aaliyah had dreams once. She wanted to be a restaurant manager, maybe even own a little diner of her own someday. She'd studied hospitality at a community college but dropped out after her mother got sick and Zoe was born. Life didn't ask her what she wanted. It told her what she had to do. Still, she never complained. Not when guests snapped their fingers at her like she was invisible. Not when other servers joked behind her back about affirmative action hires. And not when Tracy Ward, the cafe manager, found 1,000 tiny ways to remind Aaliyah of her place, making her clean the bathrooms, assigning her the worst sections, and once, whispering, "You people should be grateful for a job like this." Aaliyah didn't fight back. She couldn't afford to. She had Zoe to think about. Every night, after washing her hands raw and counting tips that never seemed to add up, Aaliyah would come home, kiss her daughter goodnight, and say the same thing she always did. "We're gonna be okay, baby. Mama's working on it." But the truth was, she was tired. Not just in her body, but in her spirit. Tired of being seen as less. Tired of surviving instead of living. Tired of feeling like no matter how hard she tried, it would never be enough. That morning, when she tied her apron and stepped into the cafe, Aaliyah had no idea the storm was already forming, that by the end of the day, her name would be in headlines, that her silence would finally break and the world would listen. Because sometimes, life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes, it shows up at your table, uninvited. And everything changes. It started like any other Saturday morning at Hartman Cafe. The smell of roasted coffee, bacon sizzling on the grill, the chatter of early risers filling the air. Aaliyah balanced a tray of pancakes and orange juice with practiced grace, smiling through the noise, through the fatigue, through everything she'd learned to hide. By 9 a.m., The cafe was packed businessmen in tailored suits, tourists with cameras, and a handful of regulars who nodded when she passed. She loved moments like this, where kindness still felt possible. But peace never stayed long. Tracy Ward, the cafe manager, stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching Aaliyah the way some people watch for mistakes. When a table of wealthy customers waved her over, Tracy stepped in. "Aaliyah," she said sharply, "Table 4 is VIP. Don't mess it up. They already complained about your attitude last week." "My attitude?" Aaliyah asked quietly. "They said I smiled too much." Tracy leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Just do your job. And remember, not everyone wants to be served by someone like you." Aaliyah felt the sting, but she swallowed it like she always did. She turned toward the table, holding the tray steady. The customers were laughing, 3 men and a woman in designer clothes. One of them, a tall man with a Rolex, looked her up and down. "Guess the diversity program's working," he joked. The others chuckled. Her smile didn't break, but inside, something did. Then the door slammed. Aaliyah froze. Standing in the entrance, red-eyed and swaying, was Mark Ellis, her ex-boyfriend, drunk, unshaven, his leather jacket hanging off one shoulder. "So this is where you've been hiding?" he shouted. Heads turned. The cafe went silent. Aaliyah's heart raced. "Mark, please, you need to leave." He laughed bitterly. "Leave? After everything I did for you? You think you're better than me now? Serving these people? Pretending you belong?" Tracy stepped back, smirking. "Aaliyah, control your friend." "He's not my friend," Aaliyah whispered. Mark slammed his fist on a table. Coffee spilled. "You lied to me. You said we were family." He lunged toward her. She stumbled backward, tray crashing to the floor. The sound echoed. No one moved. No one helped. Phones came out instead, people filming, whispering. Mark struck her across the face. A sharp crack cut through the air. Aaliyah hit the ground, her cheek burning. And in that moment, her daughter Zoe, just outside the cafe doors, waiting for her mama to finish work, saw everything. She didn't think, she just ran. Out the door, across the street, past the cars and the noise. Toward the only building she thought could save her mother. Hartman Tower. Where her small voice would soon echo louder than any scream, and where the world would finally stop pretending not to see. William Hartman didn't believe in accidents. He built an empire by trusting patterns, numbers, logic. But as he stepped through the glass doors of Hartman Cafe, following a terrified little girl and a trail of chaos, something shifted in him, something that had nothing to do with business. The cafe had gone silent, customers frozen mid-bite, phones recording. Aaliyah was on the floor, hand pressed to her swollen cheek, eyes wide with shock. Standing over her was Mark, chest heaving, face twisted with rage. And just a few feet away, Tracy stood motionless, arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Step away from her," Will said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Mark turned, confused, and then scoffed when he saw the suit. "Who the hell are you?" Will didn't blink. "The man who owns this building, and the one who's calling the police if you don't move now." Mark's jaw tightened. "You rich boys think you can tell people like me what to do?" Will took a step forward. "Right now, I'm telling you that if you touch her again, you won't leave this cafe standing." Security arrived behind him, 2 large men in dark polos moving fast, eyes locked on Mark. They grabbed him, twisted his arms behind his back, and forced him to the ground. Mark resisted, screaming curses, but Will never looked away from Aaliyah. She was trying to sit up, blinking back tears, but not crying. Her daughter clung to her side, face buried in her shirt. The tray she'd dropped lay inches away, its contents scattered like broken dignity. Will knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" She hesitated. "I'm okay." "You're not," he said softly, "but you will be." He turned to Tracy, who was still frozen by the counter. "Why didn't you stop him?" She straightened. "This wasn't my fault. She was causing a scene. She should have called security sooner." Will's eyes narrowed. "You stood there and watched an employee get assaulted. On my property, under your supervision." Tracy opened her mouth to protest. "You're fired," Will said coldly, effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the cafe. Will stood, looked around at the crowd. Anyone else want to explain why they stood by and filmed instead of helping? Silence. He reached into his jacket and handed Zoe a small card. "This has my number. You call me if you ever need anything." To Aaliyah, he said only this: "You're not invisible. Not anymore." And with that, he walked out, leaving a shaken room, a broken silence, and a story that was only just beginning. The cafe emptied slowly, the air thick with discomfort. Conversations resumed in whispers, like guilt trying to disguise itself as curiosity. Some customers left quietly, ashamed of what they'd seen or what they hadn't done. Others lingered near the windows, pretending to look at their phones, still recording as if waiting for one last headline-worthy moment. But at the back booth, where Aaliyah now sat with an ice pack pressed to her face, the world had narrowed into something much smaller. Just her daughter, and the heavy, echoing silence left behind. Zoe hadn't let go since it happened. Her small hands gripped her mother's arm, like if she let go, the world would unravel again. Aaliyah stroked her hair gently, even as her own hands trembled. Not from the pain, but from the sudden shift being seen. "I'm okay, baby," she whispered. "It's over." But they both knew it wasn't. Not really. Across the room, a few waitstaff had gathered in the kitchen, whispering in hushed tones. Some looked shaken, a few looked annoyed. One of them, a young hostess named Erin, quietly approached with a cup of water. "I'm sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. "For what happened, for all the times we didn't say anything." Aaliyah looked up, surprised. "Thank you." Erin hesitated. "What Mr. Hartman did, that was something. No one's ever stood up for us like that. Us." That word sat with Aaliyah longer than she expected. Meanwhile, in the back hallway, Tracy Ward sat in a plastic chair, arms folded, bitterness on her face. She'd packed up her things in silence, refusing to speak to security or offer any explanation. To her, this wasn't about justice, it was humiliation, and she blamed Aaliyah. Upstairs in his office, William Hartman stared out the window, his mind still replaying the scene. He'd made boardroom decisions worth billions, but this was different. This wasn't about profit margins. It was personal. He thought of Zoe's voice, the panic, the clarity. "They're hurting my mama." It shook something loose in him, something buried under years of suits, stock meetings, and polite indifference. That little girl hadn't run to a cop or a teacher. She'd run to him. And now he felt responsible, not out of guilt, but out of awareness, because the truth was clear. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a reflection of the world, of the culture in his buildings, of what he had allowed by doing nothing. And William Hartman had never been the kind of man to look away once he truly saw. That night, Aaliyah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the bruise forming on her cheek in the mirror above her dresser. It wasn't the worst pain she'd felt, but somehow, it cut deeper. Not because of Mark, not even because of Tracy, but because this had happened before, and too often, it happened in silence. Zoe was already asleep, curled into a blanket on the pull-out couch, a cartoon still flickering on the old TV. Aaliyah listened to her daughter's steady breathing, a sound that had always grounded her. Tonight, it was a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. She reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a worn photo. Her mother, in a nurse's uniform, smiling in front of a brick apartment building. Aaliyah had that same smile once before life taught her to hide it. Her mother's name was Camille, a woman who raised 3 kids on 2 jobs and never complained. A woman who taught her daughter to stand tall, even when the world tried to shrink her. Camille died the same year Zoe was born. Cancer, no insurance, no time. Aaliyah remembered sitting in that hospital room, holding her mother's hand, promising she would never let her daughter feel the kind of helplessness she had grown up with. But sometimes, promises break not because you don't mean them, but because the world leans too hard. She folded the photo and slipped it back in the drawer. Then, slowly, she opened her phone. A message notification blinked at the top of the screen. Unknown number. "This is William Hartman. I meant what I said. You're not invisible. Let me help." She stared at the words, Her instinct screamed not to trust it. Men like him didn't help women like her, not unless there was something in it for them. But then she thought of his face in the cafe. The way he stood between her and Mark. The way he fired Tracy without hesitation. And most of all, the way he knelt down not to give her pity, but to offer her dignity. Maybe this was real. Maybe for once someone saw her not as a problem, not as a charity case, but as a person. She typed 2 words, "Thank you," then deleted them. Instead she wrote, "Why?" Seconds later, the reply came, "Because no one ever helped my mother either." And just like that, Aaliyah understood maybe their stories weren't so different after all. 3 days passed. The bruise on Aaliyah's cheek began to fade, but the tension in her chest hadn't moved an inch. She went back to work, only this time, not at Hartman Cafe. That door had closed. William had connected her with a different position upstairs, in the corporate lounge, serving executives and high-profile guests. The pay was better, the hours more stable, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was standing somewhere she belonged. People spoke to her differently, looked at her with respect. Or maybe they'd just heard the story. Either way, it felt new, strange, a little fragile. Zoe adjusted too. She had started drawing again, mostly pictures of her and her mom, usually with a tall man in a suit standing nearby. "That's Mr. Hartman," she'd say proudly. "He helped Mama." But peace, especially for women like Aaliyah, never stayed long. Late one evening, as she was finishing her shift, a voice cut through the quiet. Well, look who finally made it upstairs." Her heart dropped. She turned slowly. Mark Ellis stood near the hallway exit, arms crossed, smirking like he'd just found something he thought he'd lost. He looked sober, but that didn't make him any less dangerous. His eyes were too calm, too focused. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking. He shrugged. "Place has a bar, doesn't it? Thought I'd grab a drink, maybe say hi." Security should have stopped him. No way he got in without someone letting him pass. But Mark was slick, manipulative. He could smile his way through any locked door. And he knew exactly where to find her. "I told you to stay away," Aaliyah said, stepping back. "You think you're better than me now?" he said, moving closer. "All it took was one little pity party, and now you're some kind of princess. Leave, Mark." He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "You can't hide behind your rich boyfriend forever. Sooner or later, he'll forget. They always do. But me? I remember. You're mine." Before she could respond, a firm hand landed on Mark's shoulder. "Let's take a walk," William Hartman said. Mark spun, startled. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Will replied, his voice ice cold. "You were warned. You came back anyway." Within seconds, 2 plainclothes security guards flanked Mark. He tried to argue, but they didn't listen. They escorted him out the back, through a private exit firm, silent, final. Aaliyah stood frozen, hands clenched. William turned to her, gentler now. "You okay?" She nodded, barely. But in her eyes, something else was growing: rage, yes, but also resolve. Because this time she wasn't running. News travels fast, especially when it touches a nerve no one wants to talk about. Within 24 hours of the incident, the story was everywhere. Waitress assaulted in luxury cafe, CEO intervenes. Blogs ran with it. Social media exploded. Talk shows debated it. But behind every repost and hot take was a deeper, uglier truth. This wasn't just about a waitress. It wasn't just about a billionaire playing hero. It was about race, power, and who society chooses to protect. Downtown Atlanta was split right down the middle. Some praised William Hartman as a symbol of progress, a white executive who didn't just make a statement, but took real action. He fired a manager on the spot. He protected a black woman without hesitation. For many, that was enough to label him a hero. But others were less forgiving. "It's just reverse discrimination," one comment read under a local news post. "That waitress probably overreacted. She should be grateful she even had a job there," another added. And then there were those who whispered, not online, but in boardrooms and brunch tables. "She must have done something to provoke him." Aaliyah felt it everywhere she went, in the way some people stared at her a little too long, in the way others avoided eye contact altogether. She could feel the weight of the labels being stapled to her back. Victim. Problem. Symbol. At the grocery store, an older white woman bumped her cart and didn't say a word. At the gas station, a man muttered something under his breath as she walked past. At her daughter's school, the teacher who once smiled at her in the pickup line now barely nodded. But there was another side too, a quieter, stronger one. A group of black women from a local nonprofit reached out, offering support, legal resources, therapy if she wanted it. Aaliyah was stunned. They weren't pitying her. They were standing with her. "You're not alone," one of them said. "We've all been Aaliyah." And then came the letters, handwritten notes, emails, messages on social media, from women across the country. "You gave me the courage to speak up. Watching your story helped me leave my abuser. You reminded me that I'm not crazy, that it really is harder for women like us." For every cruel comment, there was a voice that said, "I see you." Aaliyah kept those messages, read them at night when the fear tried to creep back in. Because she knew now she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was standing for every woman who had ever been silenced, ignored, or erased. And this time, the world was finally paying attention. It happened on a Wednesday. The kind of warm spring afternoon when everything feels deceptively calm. Aaliyah had just finished her shift in the executive lounge. Her hair pulled back, her shoulders a little straighter than they used to be. She wasn't healed, not yet, but she was standing taller. Zoe was waiting for her downstairs, chatting with the building receptionist like she always did. They'd started a new routine. Mama would take her for ice cream every Wednesday. Just the two of them, their quiet way of reclaiming joy. But as Aaliyah stepped off the elevator and crossed the lobby, she saw him. Mark. He wasn't shouting this time. He wasn't drunk or slurring or swinging. He was calm. Too calm. He wore a cheap suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was standing next to Zoe. She froze. Zoe didn't look scared yet. She was holding her little art folder, talking, probably telling him about her drawings, the way she did with anyone who looked interested. Aaliyah's heart dropped into her stomach. She ran. "Zoe," she called out, breath catching. "Come here. Now." Zoe looked up, confused, but obeyed instantly. Mark stepped back. "Relax," he said smoothly. "I didn't touch her. Just wanted to say hi." "You're violating a restraining order," she said, voice shaking. "You don't get to be near her." He chuckled. "You really think paper protects you? You think that man you work for will always have your back?" People were watching. The receptionist had already called for security. But Aaliyah couldn't wait. She stepped between Mark and her daughter. "You don't get to be in our story anymore," she said, steady now. "You're done." He smirked. "You sure about that?" "Yes." Behind her, William Hartman stepped into the lobby. He wasn't alone. 2 Atlanta police officers walked in right behind him. Mark barely had time to turn before they grabbed him. This time, it wasn't private security. It was official, and it was final. "Mark Ellis, you are under arrest for violation of a protective order, stalking, and endangerment of a minor." Mark didn't fight this time. Maybe he knew. Maybe he finally understood that the game was over, that Aaliyah wasn't scared anymore. As they cuffed him, Zoe reached for her mother's hand. "Is he going to hurt us again?" she whispered. Aaliyah knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her daughter's face. "No, baby. Not ever again." William walked over, silent at first. Then he said softly, "He won't come near either of you again, I promise." This time, Aaliyah believed him. Because this time, justice had a face, and it wasn't afraid to stand in the light. Mark Ellis didn't make bail this time. His arrest made local headlines again, but this time, the tone was different. There was no spin, no excuses. The footage from the building lobby, the restraining order violation, the prior assault, it all stacked into a case too heavy to ignore. William made sure of it. He'd called in a team of attorneys, not just for Aaliyah, but for every woman Mark had harmed before. Because now that the spotlight was on, more voices had come forward, women with similar stories, women who'd stayed silent because no one believed them. Until now. The district attorney moved fast, charging Mark with multiple counts: violation of a restraining order, stalking, assault, and endangerment of a minor. His trial was set within weeks. Aaliyah was called to testify. She stood in the courtroom in a simple navy dress, her voice steady, her story clear. She told them what he did, what he said, what she survived. She didn't cry on the stand, not because she wasn't emotional, but because she refused to let Mark see her break. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, the silence in the courtroom felt sacred. Mark Ellis was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 8. The judge, a black woman in her late 50s, didn't sugarcoat her words. "Mr. Ellis," she said, "this is not just about one victim. It's about every woman who's ever been made to feel unsafe, unheard, or unseen. Justice does not mean revenge, it means accountability. And today, you are finally accountable." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, but Aaliyah didn't speak to the cameras. She didn't need to. Her presence, strong, composed, spoke volumes. Back at Hartman Tower, William called an all-staff meeting. He didn't talk about quarterly earnings or expansion plans. Instead, he unveiled a new company initiative, the Camille Project, named after Aaliyah's late mother. It would provide legal support, counseling, and emergency housing for women experiencing abuse. Not just employees, but community members too. Fully funded by the Hartman Foundation. The room erupted in applause. For Aaliyah, it wasn't about heroism or headlines. It was about legacy. Her mother had taught her to keep standing. Zoe taught her why it mattered. And now, the company that once watched her serve coffee in silence was standing with her loudly. Justice didn't undo the pain, but it opened a door. And on the other side was safety, dignity, and a future no longer defined by fear. Spring turned to summer, and for the first time in years, the season felt like a promise instead of a threat. Aaliyah moved into a new apartment just outside the city, safe, sunlit, and quiet. There was a small garden out back where Zoe planted marigolds and carrots, just like her grandma used to. It wasn't big. It wasn't flashy, but it was theirs. Every morning, Zoe walked to school with confidence, her backpack bouncing, her curls free and wild in the wind. And every afternoon, Aaliyah picked her up with a calm heart, not looking over her shoulder, not bracing for a shadow. She'd started therapy. At first, she resisted. The idea of digging through years of pain felt exhausting. But her counselor, an older black woman named Dolores, had a way of asking questions that made the healing feel less like excavation and more like exhale. "You're not broken," Dolores told her during one session. "You were never broken. You were burdened. And now, you're laying some of that burden down." At work, Aaliyah's role continued to grow. She wasn't just part of the hospitality team anymore. William brought her into the corporate social responsibility department, advising on real policies, helping shape the Camille Project from the inside. Her voice carried weight in board meetings. People listened. She didn't wear suits or change her tone. She didn't hide her past. She led with it. Because surviving wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was something to build from. Zoe was thriving too. Her teachers said she was gifted in art, and her drawings had grown more vibrant, more detailed. Her latest piece showed a woman with brown skin, holding hands with a little girl in a field of stars. They were both smiling. When William came to dinner one evening, something that had become more frequent, Zoe proudly showed him the drawing. "That's me and Mama," she said. "She's not scared anymore." William looked at the drawing for a long time. Then at Aaliyah. "No," he said quietly. "She's not." Their relationship wasn't easy to define. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but it was real, built on trust, respect, and shared pain. They understood each other in ways that didn't need explaining. One night, sitting on the balcony, Aaliyah said, "I used to think survival was the end goal." William nodded. "And now? Now I know it's just the beginning." She wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. Free. And finally, after so many chapters written in fear, she was holding the pen to write her own. Not all heroes wear suits. Some wear aprons, carry scars, and speak with voices that once trembled before they roared. Aaliyah's story is more than a tale of survival. It's a mirror, a reflection of what too many women, especially black women, endure in silence. The discrimination, the judgment, the invisible weight of walking into a room and knowing you're already underestimated. But her story also proves something else, that dignity can't be erased by violence. That strength doesn't always shout, it shows up quietly, in the way a mother keeps going, in the way a child chooses hope, in the way a community rises after years of being overlooked. Mark Ellis thought control was power, but real power? That belongs to the ones who rise after being broken, who protect without expecting applause, who love without conditions, who say, enough, and change not just their story, but the system. William Hartman wasn't perfect. He came from a different world, privileged, protected, but he listened. He stepped forward when it mattered. And in doing so, he reminded us all that allyship is action, not intention. This isn't just Aaliyah's victory. It's a blueprint. For the girl watching this, wondering if her voice matters, it does. For the mother who's too tired to fight anymore, you're not alone. For the bystander who thinks it's not your problem, it is. Because injustice anywhere isn't just a wound for one person, it's a bruise on all of us. And healing takes more than time. It takes truth. It takes courage. It takes someone choosing to speak up when silence is easier. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Never underestimate the power of showing up. For yourself, for your children, for strangers who become something more. And if this moved you, if Aaliyah's courage stirred something inside you, don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. This is Hidden Worth, where every story uncovers something deeper, strength where others saw weakness, light where others saw shadows, worth where others saw none. Like, share, subscribe. But more than that, carry this story forward. Because someone out there still needs to hear that she matters, that she's seen, that she too is worthy.